Jackson. Welcome on board the mother of all talk shows, Jackson. It's getting late to avoid the war. What's your take on it?
Well, I mean, I think that just about everyone in the world wants to avoid this war, and especially Russia and Ukraine. It seems like the only people who really want a war are the same people who've been lying us into wars for decades and decades now, the United States and the United Kingdom. And, Vladimir Putin is doing everything within his power to try and prevent this war. He made a plea directly to British press this past week saying, I do not want this. All I'm asking for is the United States to uphold previous commitments that they have made to our country. So there's not a whole lot more that they can do. And the U.S. is going to do what they've always done, manipulate foreign powers that they have already launched coups and regime change operations in, like they did in Ukraine in 2014, to try and achieve their greater foreign policy goals of destabilizing countries that don't toe a U.S., hegemonic line on a global stage.
It's perfectly expressed, perfectly summed up, but it begs the question, why? Two whys. Why are European countries preparing to fight an American war that America is not going to fight? The American troops have now all been withdrawn from Ukraine. So have the British troops, by the way. But it is the continent of Europe that will pay in blood and economic ruin if this war happens in the next 72 hours, as the US has promised us it will. So that's the first why. The second why is the one I posed earlier. Why does the United States have to have Russia as an enemy?
Those are really good questions. As for the first one, I don't think that there's any real good answer for that other than Ukrainians were stripped of their voices in 2014 when the U.S. led a coup in the country. They don't have a voice as to how their government operates anymore. They don't have a voice as to what their government is going to be going to war over, unfortunately. Their government is more inclined, unfortunately, I think, to listen to United States, deep state officials. That being said, we've also seen Zelensky come out and say that he doesn't want a war and he doesn't believe that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. We've seen their defense minister, Ukraine's defense minister, over the past 2 weeks say that Ukrainians should not be packing their bags. They should not be worried. This is all part of the United States' larger game of diplomatic chess. So Ukrainians, I believe, do not want a war. Unfortunately, again, as we've seen the United States do and the United Kingdom do in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and what they're trying to do, I think, in China right now, lying about Hong Kong, Tibet, and Uyghurs, they are trying to destabilize foreign countries that don't toe their line on the U.S. global stage. Speaking as to, the likelihood of this happening, we're getting conflicting messages even out of the White House. We see some messages coming out and saying that, well, a Russian invasion is imminent, it's days away, and it's going to happen this week. And then we're seeing other messages come out of the White House almost simultaneously saying, well, Vladimir Putin, he might not be so sure. He may not have made a final decision as to whether or not he's going to invade Ukraine. All the while, Vladimir Putin is still reiterating that he does not want to do this. It's a question of whether or not the U.S. is going to break their agreements that they have previously made, going all the way back to 1990, and that have been, reiterated and re-agreed upon by U.S. and U.K. leaders and other, Western-aligned leaders to the Russians for up until today, and it's very, very disappointing to see this because I truly believe that the global population, though they do not want a war, they also might not understand just how big of a deal this is and how scary the future could be with these two nuclear powers going to war. Russia is the most powerful military that the U.S. would be fighting against out of any military in the past 50 years combined. The United States just got their butts handed to them in Afghanistan when they tried to maintain special ops and black ops and private contractors in Afghanistan, and the Taliban kicked them out. So I don't see this going well. The United States military is very apt and strong, but it's led by a bunch of individuals who want to saber rattle and go to war, even if it means countless individuals dying and the world going into a very dark place.
How's it playing in Peoria? What's the U.S. public's attitude to it, or are they oblivious to it?
The U.S. public is aware of what's happening, but they don't understand the history of what has taken place between the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia, right? The U.S. doesn't understand, again, as I just mentioned, that they have made promises going back all the way to 1990 that they would not extend NATO or NATO troops or NATO weaponry 1 inch east of Germany, right? Which is a very important point to bring up in this broader discussion. You hear a lot of people, even self-described socialists and self-described Marxists, who are going out on their broadcasts, their podcasts, their shows right now and saying that, well, Russia needs to come to a formal agreement with the United States, and that might involve making concessions. Again, this is not about Russia asking or the United States asking for concessions. This is about the United States trying to impose their will on other countries and break promises that they've made for decades going back now. So I think the fundamental problem here is that a lot of people in the United States sure don't want a war, but they also don't understand that the U.S. again is lying us into another potentially very deadly and costly war that could amount to World War III.
Is there any opposition to it, Jackson?
I'm a living embodiment of opposition to this. We have plenty of anti-imperialists, both on the right and the left in the United States. I myself am on the left, but Tucker Carlson, who has the #1 news show in the nation for cable news, he averages 3.24 million viewers every episode of his show per night. He has been a very, very vocal critic of the deep state's plans in the United States to go to war against Russia by allying us into this this battle over Ukraine. So fortunately, there have been some voices of reason, both on the left and the right, even in mainstream circles on this matter. But as for the rest of the mainstream news, you look at broadcasts like CBS, MSNBC, CNN, NBC, they are all directly falling in line with the imperialists, the neocons, and the Democratic establishment like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, who would love to see nothing more than going to war with Russia. Because what that means is, A, destabilization of Russia. And in a moment where we are truly moving into an age of multipolarity, the ending of unipolar American rule on the global stage, but also, as with every war, you're going to have a lot of increased profits for shareholders of arms industry companies like Raytheon and Boeing and all the others.
Well, what about the Trumpers? Now, I said the other night, it's a controversial point, but it's genuinely my view, that if Trump was the president, there would have been a deal cut by now with something in it for everybody. I believe that. I don't know if you do, but in any case, what is Trump and his support base saying about this?
It's very possible. I don't think it's that outrageous of a statement for you to have made. Donald Trump, he notably campaigned as being an anti-interventionist, especially with regard to certain countries. Notably, when he got into office, that all kind of changed. His hand was forced into appointing notorious deep state officials like John Bolton into his administration, James Jeffries into his administration to oversee Syria. Who knows what could have happened? It's very possible that there could have been some sort of a diplomatic talks that would have ended this crisis long before what we're seeing right now with Joe Biden. Unfortunately, that's just not the case, and we don't know. What we do know is that we have Joe Biden in office, a man who has been probably the most notorious warmonger for the past 40 years of his political career that has been entirely funded and propped up by corporate America. And he wants nothing more than to try and destabilize a foreign adversary in his eyes, like Russia. But getting back to that question you asked me a minute ago, why can't the United States be working with Russia in a mutually beneficial way? That's a great question. It's a question that's been posed for years in American politics. Henry Carey, who was Abraham Lincoln's economic advisor, wanted nothing more than this. He wanted to industrialize the world with leading global powers like Germany, for example. I think that right now, we're seeing Russia and China work together to try and industrialize the world, and they're reaping the benefits of that. America, on the other hand, can't provide food, clothing, clean drinking water, electricity, stable housing, or healthcare to our population because we have 800 plus military bases in 80 different countries, and we're waging who knows how many wars.
That's the law of unintended consequence, isn't it? That by picking a fight with both Russia and China at the same time, they have pushed Russia and China together ineluctably to the point that they're more or less one bloc now. And for someone my age, that's quite a surprising thing.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And you're seeing not only Russia and China unite, act more, I'd say, as partners rather than close allies, but they are uniting. You're also seeing these two countries in this age of multipolarity that we are being ushered into work with a bunch of other smaller countries all across the globe who have made a formal alliance called a Group of Friends in defense of the UN Charter, right? And they are working together to circumvent U.S. sanctions, to try and work around U.S. hybrid warfare, like regime change operations, meddling in the media of sovereign nations. And it's working, right? That's why the United States is, as so many see it to be, a crumbling empire because they no longer are able to have their control over every single corner of this globe. It's showing that Russia and China, notably even after the 2014 coup in Ukraine, when Crimea was, after their referendum was officially annexed into Russia, they have a substantial amount of control that they're able to exhibit on the global stage in a balance to the United States. So the United States right now, as I see it, is freaking out. They don't know what to do. They see that their empire is crumbling. They understand that the citizenry, both left and right, are opposed to them. There's a political realignment happening in this country. Even the majority of Republicans of this Trump MAGA base that you mentioned are opposed to going to war with Russia. It's an incredible thing. It's a beautiful thing as an American to see this. Unfortunately, our politicians don't listen to us. Our politicians listen to corporate America, to deep state officials, and that's how it's going to be for the foreseeable future.
I told you this guy was good, didn't I? Jackson, how do we see your work? How do people follow you on The Dive?
I appreciate the kind words, and thank you for having me on. You can find me on YouTube at The Dive with Jackson Hinkle.